can't buy happiness, but it can buy a new sun. Written by Ace of Spades. Read by Nelcor. Phil hadn't been planning to buy anyone at the slave auction. He hadn't planned to be in the market on the day of a slave auction was held. But here he was, running an errand for Kristen. "And here we have a piglin brute, 12 years old. He speaks common and is able to carry 3 times his body weight," the announcer yelled into the crowd. A piglin brute? And a child at that. Phil's eyes snapped to the stage, where a piglin child stood in chains as people crowded around him to get a good look. Phil's feathers ruffled. He was a child, not a piece of meat. He turned around, his task abandoned, and strode towards the child's cellar. People parted for him. His deep green robes and emeralds at his ears ensured that. "How much for the brute?" The seller looked him up and down and smiled. 50,000 gold. May I ask if you're buying on the queen's behalf?" 50,000 was a lot of gold. Far too much, but he had to do something. Phil chuckled. "For what? Are you really trying to rob the queen?" He stepped over the barrier to walk around the piglin child and inspect him. The child cringed but stood still. "You say this is a piglin brute? He's bloody thin, and definitely not 12. Just look at his tusks. I've seen bigger ones on an actual pig." The seller's friendly smile had dropped. "I assure you, he's a brute, and the finest cargo I have." Phil circled the child again. "The finest? It's a crime to lie to the queen. Piglin brutes are bigger than this, even the children, which means either this isn't a brute, it's a hybrid, or you've been giving it far too little food, or a combination of the two. The palace will spend a fortune just to feed it enough to train it up properly for Prince Wilbur. Brutes are an investment, as I'm sure you know. Anything less than perfect is unacceptable," Phil said, pulling out the big guns. The child glared at the ground. "I'm sure we could come to an agreement. What about 40,000 gold? He will make a fine guard for Prince Wilbur. Brutes are especially good for combat and very loyal once you win them over. No one would be better suited for the job." Phil took his left arm with care and lifted it for the seller and crowd to see. "This cut is terribly infected. You really think that I believe you when you say you take good care of him? If this infection is serious, then the arm may need to be chopped off. What use is a one-armed piglin brute? I may as well select any old guard. They'll fare better than this monstrosity." The kid pulled his arm out of Phil's light grip and took a small step away from him. Phil got a good look at his back. His blood boiled. And lash marks? Absolutely not. If someone were to see, they might assume that the queen had it done. It might as well start a war. No, I assure you, he is suitable for the prince, and the lash marks were not my doing. It's nothing that some fine shirts can't hide. How about 30,000? His lips are damn near blue as well. Piglins need to be warm, otherwise they're practically useless. Weaker than a human, even. This isn't worth my time. I'll be taking the queen's gold elsewhere," Phil said, taking a step back from the child. "This kind of neglect is illegal. I won't allow my queen to buy from someone who mistreats their slaves to save a few gold. You'll thank me if I don't tell Commander Dream about your little operation." 15,000, and he's all yours," the seller said desperately. The crowd had grown larger, watching the mess unfold like it was a very dramatic play. Phil pretended to mull it over, making a show of giving the child one last examination. He pulled off one of his many rings and gave it to the seller. "This is collateral. I'll be back later with the gold. I'll be taking this one to the palace now to clean off and present to Her Majesty." "Yes, of course. It's been a pleasure doing business with you." He took the ring and gave Phil the key to the shackles. Phil undid the chains that connected the child to a steel post. "Come on," he said, tugging on the chain light slightly. "Let me take you home." Techno was cold, scared, hungry, and being taken somewhere strange, to the massive castle that loomed above the entire city by someone who must have hated him. He wanted to go home. "What's your name?" the winged man asked once they walked through the gate that divided the city from the gardens of the castle. Technoblade, Techno said, painfully slow. He could understand common for the most part, but speaking it was another story. He should have said it faster, should have been more sure of himself so that his new master would at least think he could do one of the things his previous master had promised. "That's a nice name. I'm Philza, but everyone calls me Phil. We're going to head to the baths to get you washed off and in some nice clothes." he said as he walked, leading Techno through a grand hall. Once they were in the baths and Techno was thoroughly lost, Phil undid the chains on his wrists and legs. He showed him where the soap and towels were, telling Techno to take as long as he wanted while he fetched him clothes. Techno sunk into the hot water. The chill that'd been with him since he'd left the never dissipated. After an age of warming up, he grabbed the soap and a small towel. The water was already brown, but the dirt was caked to his skin and required force to remove. Phil came back, eyes covered with one hand as he walked in and set the clothes down within reach. Put these on. When you're ready, and we'll head to the doctor to get your arm checked, and then we'll get food. Techno stayed in the water until it began to grow cold. He got out and pulled the clothes on. They were a little big on him, but the fabric was thick. A deep red cloak with a fur lining was on the bottom. It must have been a mistake, but Techno threw it on anyway and hoped Phil wouldn't realize it. After being given a red liquid that tasted sweet and made him feel fuzzy, Techno was allowed to lay down for a few minutes while the adults spoke. She accused Phil of being broody and irresponsible when she thought Techno was asleep. Phil woke him up gently after a while and took him to the kitchens to eat. In the kitchens stood a woman dressed in deep purples, her hands on her hips as she tapped her foot. When the pair walked in, her eyes went to Philza. "Phil, my darling, love of my life, you've been gone for hours. I've checked the kitchen 7 times and we're still out of sugar." She bared her teeth at him. "Yes, I know, I got..." He glanced at Techno. "Sidetracked. Do tell, darling." Phil glanced at Techno, pointing to some food that had been left out for people to take. "Go help yourself to whatever you want while we talk." Techno bolted to the table. Kristen waited until Techno was out of earshot to speak. "Love, would you like to explain why there's a child wearing Wilbur's old clothes? You were supposed to get sugar. Wilbur was so excited to make cookies today, and I had to tell him we'd do it tomorrow because we don't have any." Phil sighed. "There was a slave auction on the market." "There aren't supposed to be auctions on Tuesday." "There was, and he was there. The seller wanted 50,000 gold for him." Kristen looked over Techno, who was eagerly ripping apart a loaf of bread to eat. "Why? You were only 40,000. "He's a piglin brute. I managed to knock the price down to 15,000. Chris, he was filthy. Had a massive cut on his arm, and there were lash marks on his back." "Oh my stars." "I know. I gave him one of my rings as collateral. Said I'd be back with the gold later. I'll go get the sugar first thing tomorrow morning and pay for Technoblade." She nodded. "You do that, but take Dream with you." Phil pulled Kristen into a kiss. "I will. I love you so much." Techno kept waiting for them to stop being nice to him. It'd been a few days, and they were still pretending to care about him. They gave him his own clothes that fit him, mushrooms from the nether that didn't taste quite right, but tasted more like home than anything he'd eaten in a long time. But no gold. Their son, Wilbur, was covered in gold. Rings, necklaces, bracelets, embroidered on his clothes. He was only 9 and had more gold from 2 people than Techno had given from his entire clan. His days were spent with Wilbur, following around as he spoke too fast for Techno to understand. They'd played with wooden swords in the gardens a lot, or sneaking into the kitchens to steal cookies while the pink-haired baker wasn't looking. Techno waited for the day that they realized he was as useless as Phil had theorized in the market. His arm wasn't that good, even after the potion he'd been given, and he was tiny, the same height, if not a little smaller than Wilbur. Things got harder when Phil and the Queen realized Techno didn't know as much common as they'd been led to believe. He didn't know what tipped them off. Maybe how he never looked at anyone in meals or nodded along to whatever Wilbur said and hoped for the best. They got him a piglin hybrid tutor from the Southern Kingdom. She was nice, and knew piglin even if her pronunciation was a little off. Techno's tutor found Phil as soon as their first lesson had finished. "Sir, you said that the Queen took Technoblade in as her son, correct?" She looked like she was trying to decide if she should be agitated or exasperated. "Yes, she has. Where is his gold?" "His gold?" She chose agitation. "Yes, his gold. Where is it? I don't see as much as a nugget anywhere on him." "He's not got any." "He's not... Why haven't you given him any gold? Surely there has to be some laying around in a vault gathering dust." "There's no need to raise your voice. What are you talking about?" She sighed. "Piglins give their clan members gold to show their love and devotion. Prince Wilbur is covered in it, and Technoblade has none. He thinks you don't care about him." Shit. Thank you for telling me. As Phil searched for Techno, he pulled one of his earrings off. It wasn't fancy, a small emerald dangling on a gold chain, but it was something, and he'd get more. He'd get every last piece of gold in the kingdom if he had to. Phil found Techno in the gardens playing with Wilbur. Techno, mate, can you come inside for a minute so we can talk? Techno nodded, putting the wooden sword down, and went inside with Phil. His hands shook the entire time. Phil kneeled down and put the earring in for him. We didn't know about the gold. I'm so sorry. Let's go get Kristen, and you can pick out whatever you want from the vaults. Techno touched the earring gently. His eyes had grown wide. But the market... Fuck, you thought I was serious about all that, didn't you? Techno nodded. No, I was just trying to get the price down. Techno, I'm so sorry I didn't make that clear sooner. Techno jumped into his arms and began crying, saying something in Piglin that Phil couldn't understand. Phil picked him up. Come on, mate. Let's go find your mom and go to the vault. When the three emerged from the royal vault several hours later, Techno was practically buried in gold.